Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Ditch Decade Diets podcast. I am your host, Lorna Perozzo, certified food freedom coach and founder of the Ditch Decade Diets Academy. I've spent 10 years in an unhealthy relationship with food, binge eating, over-exercising, and feeling insecure in my body. This podcast is all about helping you get to the root of your food struggles and teaching you how to rewire your brain so you can end binge eating. If you're ready to improve your relationship with food and cultivate more self-love towards yourself and your health, this is the podcast for you. So let's get to it and jump right in. Welcome, you guys, to another episode of the Ditch Decade Diets podcast. Today, I am bringing on a guest speaker, LIVIA. She is an autism advocate and eating disorder survivor that now helps others overcome their own mental barriers through her courses, coaching programs, and books. She's the creator behind the blog LiviaBellFree.com and the host of the Live Label Free podcast. LIVIA is a long life learner that loves listening to audiobooks, going on walks, and reading the latest science on all things neurodiversity and eating disorders. This is a really incredible episode. We talked a lot about how diet culture language impacts autistic people, understanding the experience of hunger among those people who are autistic, the relationship between autism and binge eating, and specific tools to stop binge eating for those people who are autistic. So I am so excited. This was an incredible episode. So many incredible golden nuggets that I know you guys are all going to find so valuable. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the episode. All right. Hello, LIVIA. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited that you are here.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Lorna.
Of course. I thought it was so amazing that you reached out because I've never had anyone on the podcast that, is an expert on, autism and how it's, connected to eating disorders, binge eating. So I'm just so excited to have you on. I think this is going to be a really incredible episode.
Yay, I'm so glad. Yeah, because I mean the link between autism and eating disorders, it is so common, but I feel like no one knows about it until you've had firsthand experience with it. And I know you're an expert on the firsthand experience as well. And you really learn the depth of a subject or the connection once you're oh my gosh, I've experienced this. So yeah, really excited to dive into all things autism and eating.
Yeah, totally. So why don't you just to even start off here, why don't you talk about some traits of autism and how those specific autistic traits can, lead into disordered eating behaviors?
Yeah, so first of all, right off the bat, I just want to say that autism presents very differently for each autistic person, just like binge eating presents very differently for each autistic person, because the truth is we are all different. But there are a few autistic traits that I can almost say are universal among the autistic population. And the first one that I always think of is just a need for predictability and a need for routine and just having a really difficult time with change that has not been initiated by us. Because that takes away our autonomy, it takes away our control. So for me personally, growing up as a kid, I was always everything needs to always be the same. I had all my stuffed animals lined up in rainbow order. If I was reading a book, I had to read all the books in the series. Others, it had to feel complete in my head, kind of thing. And then when I was 11, in when we started learning about health and nutrition in school, I got really stuck on what the teacher said about, sugar is unhealthy, you have to exercise for this many minutes a day, which is another trait, which is autistic people tend to take things very literally. So I heard that and I was like, if I eat cookies, I'm gonna get diabetes. And yeah, if I don't exercise, I'm going to quote unquote become obese, right? And looking back now, the entire education system is so fat phobic. It's so harmful. It's so dangerous. But yeah, kind of going back to that need for predictability and routine, I started really trying to eat very healthy, like exercising a certain amount of time each day. But because my need for routine and just not liking change, I became addicted to every single day eating like the same diet, exercising the same amount, regardless of whether I was more hungry, regardless of whether I was tired. None of that mattered. It was like I did this one day, I need to do this the next day. And habits, the more you do something, the more ingrained that habit becomes. So yeah, I'd say the need for routine and predictability is one, the taking things literally is another. Another autistic trait that I think we're really gonna probably dive into more when it comes to binge eating is I don't know how I would name this trait, but I think just difficulty with interoceptive awareness. And I mean the like intuitive eating principles talk a lot about interoception and how it's so important, to tune into your inner body cues. But the thing when it comes to autistic people and actually other types of neurodiversity, so it's often seen in ADHD as well, is that we tend to lack this interoceptive awareness. So when we are hungry or thirsty or need to use the bathroom, we may feel uncomfortable, but we won't know why. Like we won't know that it's hunger. We don't know that our bladder is full. We're just like, this just doesn't feel right. Um, so yeah, if you are hungry, if your body needs food, but you don't know if your body's hungry, then you don't respond to that, obviously you're building up that energy debt that eventually can lead to spiraling into an eating disorder, and then on the other side being like, I'm so hungry now because I haven't eaten. Now I'm gonna have a binge. So yeah, I mean that can go so many ways. And for me personally, it started off as anorexia, just super restrictive. I was just never hungry. And in school I learned like if you're not hungry, don't eat. So yeah, all the traits are kind of interconnected. But I mean over the years, I struggled with anorexia for almost 7 years. And I mean, when I started recovery and I started eating again and I started showing and proving to my body there's no food scarcity, like there's enough food, you're safe, it switched to extreme hunger and I could eat thousands upon thousands of calories. And then comes that fear, of course, I will never stop eating. I'm developing binge eating disorder. Like, I'm never going to stop gaining weight. And, because you swing to the other side. But like a pendulum, sometimes you need to swing to the other side to come back to balance. So yeah, those are a few autistic traits. I mean, obviously, there are infinitely more autistic traits. But yeah, those are a few.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. You just brought so much clarity. And you mentioned a few of them, taking things literally and like the need for like routine. And I feel like it's so crazy because I feel like so many people can, relate to this, like, taking
Yeah,
things literally, like, learning like, oh, don't eat after dinner, and then it's like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna gain fat if I
right,
eat after 7 o'clock, like taking things so
right,
literally. Or you can't have, you shouldn't eat chocolate, and then it's like, oh, that's a bad food, I can never have it, right? Like it's so
right.
common. And
Yeah,
then same with like the need for routine. Like even growing up for myself, it was always
yeah,
like I needed to know when I'm going to the gym, like what my
right,
meals look like. Like it's so crazy how I think so many people can,
yeah.
relate to some of these traits.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think honestly, that's kind of where the autistic nightmare phrase comes in of, well, everyone's a little autistic.
Right?
Yeah, that's like a really common one. But like I definitely agree with you that whether you're autistic or not, like people like routine. Most people don't like sudden changes. Most people don't like surprises because those things are literally threats to our survival. Like routines, habits, these are the things that we can rely on to keep us safe. I mean, there's a reason people crave that word stability. Like, you need a stable home, you need stable income. We saw it during COVID when there was no stability, everyone was terrified because their routine was like, we're gonna fuck with you. And
Yeah.
everything was messed up. So yeah, I mean, whether you're autistic or not, or neurodivergent or not, I think the majority of people do crave that routine. And yeah, with the literal thinking as well. Um, diet culture has a really great way of playing in on that. Saying bad, good, demonizing. Like, it's just, this is why I'm called live label free, because I feel like only once you can fully let go of labels and just neutralize everything, it's like everything loses its power over you. And then you are in power, you're in control.
Yeah, I love that, like the label free, because I think for a lot of people, it's like we wanna feel like we belong, right? Like we want to be like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
doing keto or I'm doing intermittent fasting. Like I want to belong.
Yeah.
I need this label. And it's like when I came to this realization of you can just eat and
Yeah.
live without these labels, it's like, really,
Yeah.
I don't have to have a label. I don't have to be dieting. Like it's just so much more
Yeah.
freeing.
Right. Yeah, and I think you brought up a really good point there, and the words that's coming up in my mind is conformity. And Rollo May, who is considered like the father of existential psychology, I'm very interested in all the philosophical stuff. He has this quote. He said, "The opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice, it's conformity." And I just love that quote so much. Because we often think like in order to feel safe and to fit in, we need to be like everyone else. If they're going on a diet, well, they're safe, they're still alive, then we should do the same thing. I think it's a very primal instinct in a way to act like our tribal members.
Yep.
But throughout history and even when we look today, like the people that are most successful, that are making the biggest impact, these are the people that are not conforming. I mean, you and me being entrepreneurs, not slaving away for some big white guy to work a 9 to 5 job. We are making an impact because we are not cogs in the wheel, right? And to have the courage to do that, you need to stop conforming.
Yep.
So yeah, totally agree with what you said.
Yeah, no, it can be absolutely batshit scary, but it's like
Yeah,
we need that. It doesn't matter if, everyone in your family or your friend group is dieting. It's like, how can you be that person that like
right?
really follows that like pull in your heart that says like,
Yeah,
it's not meant for me anymore, you know?
right?
And I actually want to dive into that because I think there's a lot more people who are understanding that like diets aren't sustainable. I feel like a lot of people are like, okay, I'm done with this. I've done this for 10, 20, 30
Yeah,
plus years. Like I'm done with that. There has to be a better
right.
way. But there are
Mhm.
obviously still people deep, deep, deep into diet culture. So
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit more about how diet culture language impacts autistic people specifically.
Yeah, so first thing again that's coming up is that taking things literally is like this food is bad. You shouldn't eat after a certain time. Like we take these so close to heart that we're like, oh my gosh, like we need to follow this. Otherwise, X horrible thing will happen. And I mean the list of fears is endless. And then another one I think is that, autistic people or any type of neurodivergent person, we the world is not built for neurodivergent people. The world is built for neurotypical people. And that's why for so many neurodivergent people, like school is just an absolute disaster because school teaches us to be cogs in the wheel, and we are different. We think different. We act different. We just need different circumstances. And when you're built into a world, I mean, built into a world, when you're born into a world that isn't built for you, you're constantly living in this state of fight or flight mode of like, I need to protect myself from danger. I need to protect myself from threat. I mean, any kind of person that is put in a position that they don't feel like it's safe, it's their home, they're gonna be in this defensive state. And I think that fight or flight mode, the dysregulation of the nervous system plays into binge eating and disordered eating in and of itself, right? But that's obviously a different topic. Um, but yeah, anyways, to kind of conform, I guess, and to try and fit into the world, we try and put act and we try and come across as neurotypical and as normal. Because when we're normal, when we conform, we believe that we reduce our chance of criticism and threat. And then no one can say, you're weird, you're bad, what are you doing if we're just like everyone else, right? And I mean, what's a really easy, obvious way to be just like everyone else? It's to be on a diet. And I think for that reason, autistic people are a lot more vulnerable to this messaging because it's such a clear-cut way almost to try and mask and to fit into society, even if society is sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned too about like, you know, needing things to be predictable, right? And then we get all these
Yeah.
messages from, Noom and Weight Watchers, like if you just track your points, like you can lose
Yeah.
X amount of weight. If you just follow this plan, like you're going to see results. And then, probably for the brain, it's like, oh, like that makes sense. Like I can see the predictable outcome. Like all I got to do is follow it to a T so that I can get those results, right?
Yeah, and I love that you just brought up that term makes sense. Because I feel like that always comes up for autistic people. I mean, basically my whole entire eating disorder can be summed up with it just needs to make sense.
Yeah.
That's why I got so attached to numbers. That's why I got so attached to like my running routine and my exercise and my food and counting my almonds, right? Like all this ridiculous stuff you do and even in eating disorder treatment, like with the exchange system, like today's lunch is 2 starches and 2 fats and 1 dairy. I'm like, no normal person goes into the kitchen. I'm craving 3 exchanges right now. Like that is
Yeah.
such a messed up way of eating. But
Yeah.
for us, it's tangible. It makes sense, and that's why people, grasp onto these things because it's like, oh, that's an easy answer. We don't have to actually think or go deep inside ourselves because we don't know how to do that. We're not taught how to do that. So we'll just do what seems easy, which are the tangible certainties, but it's the tangible certainties that are usually just very misleading because the thing is that our inner needs will never be met in trying to conform or trying to find our answers in external circumstances.
Yep. Yep. And that's why I always say, like, not using my fitness pal, not relying on, oh, like how much is your partner eating? Well, that's how
Yeah.
much you should be eating because it
Yeah.
doesn't even make sense. Like, but
Right.
we
Right.
don't trust ourselves and we don't know better. It's just like, oh, well, that person's eating 2 pieces of pizza. Well, maybe I should just only eat 2 pieces, even though it's like,
Yeah.
I want more. It's like, no, I should probably, like, it makes sense. Like they stopped, at that much. Like that's how much I should eat as well too, and then it just
Yeah.
messes with the brain. But it's interesting. You spoke about feeling like these urges to like eat, but not really like understanding the cues. So I posted a
Yeah.
video a few months back. It went absolutely viral, and I shared the difference between a craving, hunger, and the urge to binge. And
Mm-hmm.
I had people commenting that said, like, well, I don't know the difference because I'm autistic. So
Yeah.
talk to my listeners about hunger amongst those people who are autistic and like why they can't feel it or why they can't really understand like the difference.
Well, first of all, I think this doesn't apply to me because I'm autistic. I think this doesn't these two things are not mutually exclusive. Like to be autistic does not mean like you will never be able to understand your hunger. I think it's a process, it's a journey, and that journey is just going to be a little more complicated than it is for someone who's like, "Oh, grumbling stomach, society tells me that means hunger, so now I'm going to eat." Like I don't ever have a grumbling stomach. Like I don't when people say, "Oh my God, I'm starving, I'm so hungry," like I don't know what that means. Because for me, I do have hunger, and now I'm finally able to label it as hunger because I know what hunger looks like for me because I went on that journey. Like I embarked on this journey with a sense of curiosity rather than judgment, rather than, oh,
Mm.
well, that person doesn't feel hunger in that way, so this can't mean that I'm hungry. I probably just need to go to sleep or drink water, everything diet culture says. So yeah, that term interoception, that comes back up a lot in like intuitive eating principles and stuff is interoception is also known as like a eighth sense because there's like touch, taste, smell, the 5 senses we have, and then there's also 3 more lesser known senses. So proprioception, the vestibular sense, and interoception. And interoception is basically responsible for telling us like our internal needs, so like I said, like whether you're hungry, whether you're thirsty, but also like temperature wise, like if it's like flaming hot in here and I'm wearing a sweatshirt, my interoceptive awareness is going to tell me like you need to take that sweatshirt off so we can like come back into more homeostasis. But yeah, because we lack interoceptive awareness, we have just difficulty recognizing those inner hunger cues. Um, so, and even like other cues. So, like if someone's tickling us, we may think it's like hurting, or right, like I said, if we're thirsty, we may think we need to like go to sleep. We know there's something wrong, but we just don't know what. And yeah, when it comes to like hunger, a craving, and binge eating, I think if we are like thinking about food or which is a sign of hunger, we can immediately be like, oh, well, maybe that's a craving or maybe that's an urge to binge. And but usually I feel like that comes from diet culture conditioning. Whereas I think if we would be like isolated and it would be like how do I explain this? Like there wouldn't be these labels about binge eating is bad. I mean, eating this is bad. Eating you need to eat like that person. I feel like we would be much more in touch with ourselves. Um, and I just think that the autistic journey of understanding what hunger looks like for you, I think the first step is accepting that hunger may look very different for you than it does for what you've been taught to believe. Like for me, for example, when I feel hungry, it's almost, and this can sound like it's like a binge urge, but it isn't because I won't actually go binge. It's just like I'm feeling pulled towards food. Like that's what it feels like. Like you need to eat. It's like this magnetic force. Like you need to eat something right now. Like that's what hunger feels like for me. Or I just may be thinking about food. Like I'll be working on a blog post or writing my book or something, and I'll just not be able to concentrate because I'm like, oh, I know there's like a bagel in my cabinet. Like I really want that bagel. Right? Like that'll be a sign of hunger for me. Um, and like I said, with coming at it from a place of curiosity rather than judgment, I think experimenting and being like, maybe that is hunger. I'm gonna go eat something, and if I feel better, like then I satisfied my hunger, right? But
Yeah.
if it spirals into a binge and you see that pattern over and over, then it might be like, maybe that what I was just experiencing was a binge urge. Um,
Right.
but I mean, the only way to learn anything in life is through experimentation. You're never going to get it right the first time because that would defeat the point of living.
Yeah, totally. And I love that you shared that like curiosity over judgment and how it is going to be different because even people who aren't autistic, it's like, some people are like, yeah, my stomach growls. Like for me, like my stomach doesn't really growl when I'm
Right.
hungry. It's like I start to feel a little like fatigued or like
Yeah.
tired, like low in energy. I just kind of feel like an emptiness in my body, right? So it's like
Yeah.
it could be so different for so many people.
Mhm.
And I think that just gives people this permission to like tune into your body and start trusting your body. Not like, oh, this person, the way they feel, that's how they know that they're hungry. So, like, that's the way that I should feel. It's like we really need to connect to our bodies and trust that the signals that your body is sending you, whatever it's this pull or fatigue or whatever it is, like, trust that that is, the right signal for you. And like you said, you honor it. And if it turns into a binge, it's like, okay, let me back up.
Yeah.
Maybe that wasn't actually true hunger. It was a binge urge. And then you can really just learn.
Right.
This is
Right.
beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. I always say, I mean, this in my book that I've written, Rainbow Girl, my author bio is literally Livia is a lifelong learner. And whenever people ask me like to send an author bio, like I always include that a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
Because it's true, like you and me, we know a lot of stuff through what we've experienced, and we have the honor and the privilege to help other people that are committed. But I am constantly learning from my clients. Like every conversation I walk away, I'm like, wow, they gave me such insight. And that can even be through trying to explain something to them that's like unconsciously been in my mind. But like by them asking about it, I'm like, oh, now I've finally been able to put it into words. Like honestly,
Yeah.
that's the most magical thing. Um, and yeah, that word trust is so important. And I mean, trust is at the foundation of safety. And also and lack of, I mean, yeah, anxiety. It's also tied to anxiety. Like when we feel anxious, it's because we don't trust something. One of my favorite quotes is the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust. And I mean, that's, I think, why autistic people do have so much anxiety, because we often don't trust, because a lot of the things are unpredictable in our world. A lot of the things are uncontrollable, and we feel we can only trust when we have that predictability and when we have that control. And that's again what makes disordered eating and dieting and these really tangible certainties so enticing. But in the end, that's obviously just building distrust with your body. And on top of that, I think again, going back to being born as a neurodivergent person into a neurotypical world, you have been conditioned to distrust yourself, because what you do, your natural inclinations or ways of thinking or doing are often labeled as problematic or non-compliant or bad or weird, that you're like, okay, I obviously can't trust what I do, so I just need to do what everyone else is doing. And then obviously that distrust is going to manifest into all areas of your life, because we are holistic beings. We are not isolated in one area of our lives. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So good. Such a good explanation. So a lot of like what we talked about, I can totally see like the relationship between, binge eating, disordered eating, and autism. Like I said,
Yeah.
especially like the things that stuck out to me, like you said at the beginning, was like taking things literally, the need for routine, all of those things. Is there any other things that you want to share that can help people better explain like the relationship between autism and binge eating?
Yeah, well, I actually did a podcast episode last week. I obviously don't know when this is coming out, but a recent podcast episode titled Autistic Types of Binge Eating. And I've actually differentiated between 9 different types of binge eating. So I thought maybe I can just mention a few examples, because I think it's really helpful for people to be able to differentiate like where the urge or the binging is coming from, because they're all like when it comes to autistic types of binge eating, they're all rooted in different autistic traits, which is really interesting because it helps you to kind of become more granular when you do reflect on what kind of happened here, what went wrong here, instead of, oh, you binged, like there's a problem here. And what we often do when we judge it like that is like, oh no, I'm trying to numb my emotions, or this kind of stuff. And when we look at that as the root, and that may not even be the root, you're never gonna fix the issue because it's the wrong issue, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so one example of an autistic type of binge is I actually call it the make sense binge, and I'll say that one because we were just talking about that. But yeah, for autistic people, just like I said before, everything just needs to make sense in our mind. And one way that this actually can present as binge eating is needing food to like look a certain way. So for me, I have this so strongly with like anything that's like smooth in consistency. So yogurt, ice cream, peanut butter, Biscoff, Nutella, anything that's like smooth. When I'm taking it from the jar needs to be left like in a how do you say, visually like satisfying way. So like I can't just take a spoon of Nutella and just leave it. Like I will use the spoon to like smooth out the Nutella like frosting kind of. It just like needs to make sense to me, like the look of it. But obviously, that can lead to binging, because when I'm like trying to smooth out the Nutella, I'm like, no, it doesn't look good. Okay, now we're just gonna eat that. Grab another spoon, smooth it out.
Right.
Still doesn't look good. Keep eating. Oh, now the whole jar of Nutella is gone, and now I feel sick. Or like another example is if I like bake a cake or something, or make pancakes, like all of the pancakes need to be perfectly the same size, like all of the cake slices need to be perfectly cut. And if there are pieces that are like uneven, or they're smaller or bigger, then I feel like I need to eat them. So now it's gone. So now it's like, and obviously like that isn't sustainable, and that ties back to the external circumstances and the labels. Is when you stop allowing external circumstances to decide your decisions, that's when you truly have freedom. And I think that's kind of ties back to the fear of, having foods in the house, and the very common binge eaters belief like, oh, if it's not in the house, then I'll be safe, then I won't eat it. Even though during my binges, even if it wasn't in the house, I'd always find a way. Then I'd like go to the store like a maniac and buy like 20 times of it and then eat it right there, because my brain thought it was scarce or
Yeah.
scarce. So I always say that word wrong. Um, And then another example of a type of binging, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, but I call it the analysis paralysis binge, and that is when we can't choose what to eat. So then we just end up during my eating disorder, my anorexia, it was, okay, I can't choose what to eat, I'll just not eat anything. But then when my body became programmed to learn, like, yeah, that doesn't work, it was like, okay, now I can't choose what to eat, I'll just eat everything in sight.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I'll name one more. Um, and I call that the hyperactive binge. And that kind of comes back to something I mentioned about the nervous system and feeling in that fight or flight mode. Like when you are in fight or flight mode, you're like, I'm so anxious and I don't know how to escape this danger zone. Um, Food can be so soothing and calming for our nervous system. Like the act of eating, I mean, it it provokes every single sense in the body, touch, taste, smell, as well as, our interoceptive sense, that can really almost calm our nervous system down. And I think especially if you have a history of dieting or restriction and your body perceives food to be safe, that can become also a habit, is like eating just to regulate your nervous system. Yeah, so like I said, I mentioned 9 different types in that podcast episode. But yeah, those are just a few of the big ones that I think are really common among autistic people, but also just among the regulars.
Totally. Yeah. No, I think so many people can relate to every single one of them. I'm like, yeah, I'm nodding my head up and down. I'm like, I resonate with that, in the
Yeah.
past, right? But yeah, I mean, it's good that you kind of have these like names for it. I think that's pretty brilliant. So let's say somebody listening is
Mhm.
autistic, or they know somebody who is autistic and maybe is struggling with, their relationship with food and binge eating. What would you say are like 1 to 3 tools that they can like start implementing right now to, whether it's stop binge eating, heal their relationship with food? What are some kind of tips?
Yeah, well, my tips are usually not standard tips because everyone is so different, and I
Yeah.
feel like one tip that is a tip for someone else is a fatality for another person. um so so I always actually like to start with the first tip is ask yourself, what do you want? How do you want to be eating? How do you want to feel when you're eating? Like, what do you want your relationship with food to look like? And what's really important here is we often ask ourselves, and I mean, I have so, just horrible experience in this from therapies. The therapist would always ask me, what do you need right now? And I actually have a sentence in my book that reads, if I knew, I wouldn't be here, you dumbo.
Oh my
Because the
God,
thing
so
is,
freaking true.
yeah,
Oh my gosh, I love
yeah,
that.
and the more powerful question that is so underrated is, what do I want? Because so often we ask ourselves, what do we need? What do I need to do right now? But again, we're allowing external circumstances to decide. Whereas when you ask, what do I want? That's freedom, because that's autonomy. You get to choose. So yeah, I'd say ask yourself what you want. And then from there you can take it deeper. Like, write down an ideal day of eating, write down an ideal day of living. Like, what kind of habits would you be engaging in? What would you be doing? What food would you be eating if you just did what you wanted? And like, be as detailed as possible. And I think this kind of comes back to, the power of the mind. And this is, I think, where meditation and manifestation are so powerful, because I'm sure you're familiar with this study, how they've like looked at MRI scans of people who were doing a task and then compared it with people who were just imagining themselves doing the task, and it like lit up the same parts of the brain.
Yep.
Um yeah, so for me that was really big in just healing my relationship with food, was like imagining myself like going into the kitchen, grabbing that, not using the food scale, like listening to my body. And then like I would just repeat that over and over and over in my head. And then I'd be like, okay, now I'm gonna go execute exactly that, what I did. And I would just find myself basically in a deja vu of what I had already imagined. And I was like, wow, this shit actually works.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, that, and then like the third step to that I would be obviously is to take action. Um, and again, comes back that phrase of act with curiosity, not judgment, because more times than not, especially in the beginning, it's not going to go as planned. Because our bodies often act on autopilot, right? We are programmed to behave in a certain way, and our brain ultimately learns from our actions. So over time, when you consistently practice the new action, your brain's going to be like, oh, that can become our default now.
Yeah.
So yeah, so when it doesn't go as planned, take some time to reflect on what came up, what are the barriers, like what happened or what stood in the way of you following your plan, and then you can zoom even more in on specifically like, okay, what can I do to remove that barrier or to make this aspect easier, right? But I think it all starts with asking yourself, what do I want, and giving yourself the permission to listen to that without judgment.
Yeah. So many good tips. And you even talked about like the visualization. And I actually do kind of like the same thing, but like
Mhm.
a journaling exercise where you write down like how you want to feel, how you want to
Yeah,
behave, how you want to act around food, like as if it has already happened. And then,
yeah,
like you said, it's like, yeah, you're going into the cupboards and you're grabbing some cookies and you're like, oh, wait, like I feel like, wait, I've been able to stop when I'm full. Or remember,
yeah,
like I wrote down, like, it's effortless for you to be able to stop after, you feel satisfied or whatever it is. And then you start like engaging in those behaviors and the brain's like, oh, yeah, like this is my
yeah,
new norm, right? I love
right.
it.
Yeah,
So
people always see the whole visualization thing as woo-woo, but I'm like, well, have you tried it? And is what you're currently doing working for you? You might as
yeah,
well try something new.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And yeah, everyone listening, like you have to take action. Like in order for you to do, you have a different result. Like you have to do things differently. And like Livia said, it's like the way that you course correct, the way that you can, kind of see, okay, what worked, what didn't work is by taking the action, learning, extracting information, and then making the necessary changes. So I just love this so much. This has been so like just so eye-opening and even so informative for myself. So I really, really do appreciate that.
I'm
Um,
so glad.
yeah, where can everyone find you? I'll definitely be sure to link everything down in the show notes.
Yeah, so my website is livelabelfree.com, and that's live as in LIV, so no E at the end. And my book, Rainbow Girl, I basically just uncover my entire life story from growing up undiagnosed autistic, how this led to the development of my eating disorder. I dive deep into like my period of extreme hunger and binge eating, and basically just the journey that brought me to where I am today. And I share things in that book that I have literally not told a soul, like hiding food in my underwear and water loading, manipulating treatment. So yeah, I think Rainbow Girl, you can find that again on my website, livelabelfree.com. And my Instagram is Live Label Free. I also have a podcast, the Live Label Free podcast. And yeah, that's where they can find me.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll definitely leave everything down below in the show notes. This has been so amazing. So I just so appreciate you, reaching out and us doing this, podcast episode and just giving so much value to my listeners. So yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you came on.
Yeah, thanks, Lorna.